لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that indeed in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the day and the night are signs for those who comprehend. Signs for those who have a heart that comprehends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to look all around us. You're asking for a sign of Allah, you're asking for a sign of your creation. Allah is telling you all you have to do is look around. And there is a sign. Look at the earth and how it's perfectly positioned away from the sun, far away that you can survive without it being too hot, and close enough that there is enough warmth for you for life to be viable. Look at the sky that covers and protects the earth without any pillars to hold it up. In between the heavens and the earth, look at the more than 8.7 million species of animals of living creatures that we have discovered so far. 8.7 million species. And this is all just on Earth. Earth, which is in a galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, of 200 to 400 billion stars. Billion stars. And that's all in one galaxy. And they estimate in the observable universe, there is 170 billion galaxies. SubhanAllah. Can you imagine that number? 200 to 400 billion stars in one galaxy, 170 billion galaxies in the universe. To go beyond that, that is all just the world that we can see, the seen world. There is the world of the unseen. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described other creation, like the creation of the jinn, and we hear about how strong and fast they are. Where during the time of Sulaiman alayhi salam, one of the jinn carried a throne from one city to a distant city in a blink of an eye. Or the angels, how large and powerful they are. When they were sent to the people of Lut to destroy that city, a couple of angels just with the tips of their wing took the whole city and flipped it upside down. And some of these angels, from the moment they are created until the day of judgment, they are in prostration. They are in sujood the entire time, up until the day of judgment. And when they are resurrected on the day of judgment, they go to Allah and say, "Oh Allah, we have not worshipped you enough." Their entire existence is in sujood, and they are saying, "We have not done enough." And subhanAllah, who created a creation greater than all that I have already mentioned, that of the human being. When Allah created Adam alayhi salam, He told the jinn, He told Iblis, and He told the angels to bow down to who? To Adam, a human being. And subhanAllah, thumma alhamdulillah, Allah granted you and I to be the best of the best, those who say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. For it is this statement, it is this belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly honored us, truly dignified us. That is where our true honor is. It is with this amana that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to us. When Allah says, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ مِنْهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to send down this trust on the skies, on the heavens, and on the earth, and on the mountains, but they shook and they quivered from it, and it was sent down to the human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us this religion to guide us to the straight path. Sent us this religion to take us from the darkness into the light. And it's something that when it is properly upheld, it permeates through the entire society. Let's look at an example of the people it was directly sent to, the Arabs. What were the Arabs before Islam? People of Quraysh, people of Saudi Arabia. If you look at historically what they were before Islam, they were a bunch of little tribes, little insignificant tribes, arguing and bickering over the littlest things. That when one animal goes trespasses, or one animal leaves the boundaries of one tribe to the next, and that tribe claims ownership of it, they start fighting, and for several years they'll have wars over one animal going from one land to the next. Many of the scholars say that the reason these areas were not attacked by the foreign nations is that they didn't find any value of it. There was no value there. They were not rich. They were not powerful. They did not have a status. They did not have any value for them to go and take from it. Look at these tribes. Look at these small quivering villages after Islam came. By a few short years, these small villages, they were able to take on the two superpowers at that time, the Roman and the Persian empires. When a few khilafahs later, during the time of Al-Mu'tasim, we hear the story that a Muslim woman was captured and unjustly captured and imprisoned by one of the Roman governors or one of the Roman kings in one of the Roman lands. And she was put into jail. And all she does is cry out, "Wa mu'tasima." Wa mu'ti, cries out for help. Someone hears her from that, someone nearby hears her and sends a message to the emperor, sends a message to the Khalifa, Al-Mu'tasim, that there is a Muslim woman who has been unjustly captured. What does he do? He directly sends a message to that king and tells him, if you do not release her immediately, I will send an army. The beginning of it will reach you before the end of it leaves me. He directly releases her. That was the power that they had. Now, subhanAllah, we are even afraid to make dua for our Muslim brothers and sisters all around the world. We're afraid to even make that dua. Where when you look at during the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, known as the fifth rightly guided Khalifa, a miracle happened on earth. So as you know, as the government, they take the zakat from every person. They collect everyone's zakat, and then there's certain categories that they have to pass that zakat out to. So that you've got the poor, the slaves, this and that. There's certain categories that this zakat can be given to. And as the government agency taking care of this zakat, they have to fulfill it within 1 year. This is the problem that they had. So they collected all the wealth of all the zakat of the people, and they're going around to distributing it to all these people, to all the poor people in the nation. How large was the Muslim nation at this time? It covered over 20 countries. 20 countries. That was how large the Muslim nation was. So you can imagine how many poor people there would be in 20 countries. What was the miracle? The caravan full of the zakat wealth went through all 20 countries and came back almost untouched. They couldn't find poor people to give money to. Then they had to go around again. Anybody that has any debt, pay off that debt. They went through all the 20 countries again and came back. Again, the money. There's still an immense amount of money left. Go free all the slaves. They freed all the slaves and they came back. Again, there's an immense amount of wealth. Go to the army. Beef up the army. Give them more ammunition. Give them more military power. They said, no, we don't need it. We don't need any more money. We have as much as we want. They were struggling to find people to give money to. Can you imagine a nation having that kind of problem? To the very end that after they went through, any of the young people that needed to get married, they would help them get married. Give them money to get married. Again, still an immense amount of wealth left. They go pay the debt of the non-Muslims. They went through more than 7 different times around all the nations trying to find someone to give money to. Everyone had the money they needed. Until finally they said, buy with this money some seeds and some seeds and throw it over the mountain so that the birds can benefit from the wealth of the Muslims. Can you imagine? In November of last year, the consensus or the statistics came out that in the United States, what we consider to be the superpower, 45 million people are on food stamps. 15% of the population needs money from the government to live on their food. And there was a time when over 20 nations they could not find a single person to give a single poor person to give money to. That was the effect that Islam had on a nation. But that's not all. It's not just on a global level. You should see the effect on an individual level. A prime example, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. When you look at it, he is a prime example of how Islam can change a person. There was a story of Umar al-Khattab when he was found one time. He was going through these bouts of laughing and crying. And many of us heard this before. That when he asked, why are you laughing and crying? He said, I remember that during the Jahiliyyah, before I accepted Islam, we were on a caravan. We were traveling, and when it came time to worship, to worship their idols, I had forgotten my idol at home. So I looked around me, and the only thing I found were some dates. So I took the dates, formed it into a form of an idol or a statue, and started worshiping it. Later on, lunchtime came, dinner time came, he was hungry, he's looking around, there's nothing to eat. The only thing he finds is the idol he was just worshipping, and he starts eating it. And he starts laughing, saying, how could I have been in this kind of, literally, jahiliyyah, ignorance? And then he says, the reason I was crying, the Arabs, they used to practice, some of the tribe, used to practice a very heinous crime, female infanticide. They used to be ashamed whenever their wives would be blessed with, they would be blessed with, a beautiful baby girl. They would go and they would literally kill the baby girl. So Umar al-Khattab, he had a baby girl. And one time he took her out in the middle of the desert. And he was digging her grave. He was digging the grave that he was going to, a hole that he was going to put her into. And while he's digging out in the middle of the desert, some wind blew some sand and some dust into his face. So his daughter at the time, she's a few years old. She's playing around, dancing around him or whatnot, and she sees this dust and she sees sand go into her father's face. So like a loving daughter, she goes up to his face and starts brushing the dust away. And he cried, saying, "She did this moments before I was about to bury her." Now look at Umar ibn Khattab. He was one of the worst enemies of Islam. In fact, there was a time that he was on his way to go kill the Prophet ﷺ. It was to the extent that when people were talking about the conversion of Umar, they said his donkey would convert to Islam before he does. That's how far away people thought he would be. Now look at Umar al-Khattab after Islam. He became Amir al-Mu'mineen. He became the leader of the believers, the second Khalifa of the Prophet ﷺ. While he was Khalifa, while he was, the top person in the nation, during the nighttime, he would go into the streets and see the affairs of the people. Make sure everyone's doing okay. When one time he heard a family that the kids were crying because they had no food, and he heard of the situation, he went home himself, made some food with his own hands, carried it himself to that family and gave them the food. And this is a Khalifa. He became the barrier to fitna. Literally. If you look at his life, the fitna in the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim Ummah was united up until his death. There was a dream that he had that it was interpreted that his life was like a door, and that the fitna would break through that door. And that the fitna would only come once Umar ibn Khattab did not exist. He became Umar ibn Khattab that the Prophet ﷺ said that whichever direction Umar takes, shaitan goes in the opposite direction. He became Umar ibn Khattab that the Prophet ﷺ said, if there was to be another prophet after me, it would have been Umar ibn Khattab. See the stark difference between how he was before Islam and what he became afterwards? The question becomes, what happened to our Muslim Ummah nowadays? Where is our glory? Where is this status that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us? Why do we not have, what the Khilafat had? Why do we not have all this money, all this power and whatnot? Muslims right now are oppressed here and there, they're being killed here and there, and we can't do anything about it. How come we don't hear more stories of Umar ibn Khattab, where people accepting Islam, people becoming better because of Islam? Instead, we hear stories, people ashamed of their Islam. People ashamed to show that they're a Muslim. People ashamed to have the proper covering of a Muslim. And they start changing their names and, hiding their actions and whatnot. What happened to the glory of Islam? the scholars, they give an interpretation for this, or they give an analogy to kind of try to explain the situation. They give the example of the battles of Badr and Uhud. Two battles we've heard several times. Let's analyze them from a certain perspective. So when you look at the battle of Badr, it is the first battle that the Muslims fought. And they were outnumbered, more than 3-1, and outmanned and outgunned. The enemy had much more weapons, much more training, much more military. They were, from a strategic or military perspective, it was doomed. There was no way they were going to win. Yet we know what was the outcome of the battle of Badr. When the people went in with a firm heart, firm belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah sent angels to fight with them. And the believers won. The believers won that one. You go to the next battle, the battle of Uhud. The Muslims were winning. In the very beginning, the Muslims were winning, the non-Muslims were retreating. The enemy was retreating. The Prophet ﷺ gave a command to a group of people to stand on the mountain. A group of archers to stand on the mountain and not to leave that post no matter what. To not leave that post no matter what. So the Muslims were winning the battle. The enemy was retreating, and some of the Muslim army, they were starting to collect, the spoils of war. The people on the mountain seeing this, what do? They leave their post. At least some of them stayed, but most of them left their post and went to go collect that money. Went to go, share in that spoils of war. Then what happened? Khalid ibn Walid, one of the people who at that time was a non-Muslim, took charge of the non-Muslim army and came around the exact post where they were supposed to be posted at. And while not necessarily the non-Muslim didn't necessarily win, the Muslims went from a guaranteed victory to what you can kind of call a draw. And they lost many people during this time. But they did not win that battle. Now the scholars interpret something. If you look at the difference between the two stories, if during the battle of Uhud, a small group of people disobeyed one order of the Prophet ﷺ, and they more or less lost the battle. What about nowadays when you have millions and tens of millions of Muslims all around the world disobeying hundreds and thousands of the commands of the Prophet ﷺ? If a small group of people disobeying one command would lose a battle, what about millions of people disobeying several commands? What should be our status? How should we look like nowadays? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. When you look at the difference of the change in the people from one battle to the next, in the first one they had firm belief in Allah. They wanted the akhirah. They did not look for the spoils of this world. But in the second battle, the heart started shaking a little bit. The heart started going for being attracted to the spoils of this war, of this world. Prophet ﷺ makes a very interesting hadith, and I'll end the first part of the khutbah with this. He said that whoever seeks the hereafter, Allah will make pleasure in between his eyes. Allah will make pleasure right in front of him. And He will gather to him all his affairs, and the dunya will come chasing after him. Imagine the dunya is coming to you. If you look at the Battle of Badr, if you look at the Muslim nation, how it increased in size and status and in wealth, they were not after the wealth. They were after the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the interesting is, they got that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ. Allah is pleased with them. And when Allah is pleased with them, the wealth of the dunya came after them. They were not seeking the wealth, they were seeking Allah, but they got both. However, when they started seeking the wealth and started leaving Allah a little bit, and they started seeking the wealth, they lost both of it. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So we had a little history lesson, and we kind of did some sort of diagnosis for the problem. What is a solution? What is the first step? What do we start doing? And inshallah, this is going to be the end of the khutbah. One last story. It's the story of Malik ibn Dinar, one of the tabi'een, one of the people that came after the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. He tells us, he narrates his own story, saying that before he became on the right path, before he became righteous, he was a corrupt cop. A corrupt cop. And that he used to go around and he used to love to drink. He used to drink and get drunk all the time, and being a cop, he was a man of authority. He would go and exert his authority wherever he wished. And nothing can stop him. As he went through the years, he got married and he had a beautiful little daughter. And he loves his daughter so much. She filled him with happiness. He would leave work excited just so he can spend some time with his daughter. And then one time, when his daughter, while he was playing with his daughter, when his daughters were in between his arms, she dropped dead. She passed away right in front of him. This was a great shock. This is, something extreme that happened right in front of him. So what did he do? He went into drinking. He drank and he drank and he drank until he passed out completely drunk. And he narrates the dream that happens, that he sees. He says, I dreamt as if the day of judgment started, as I was resurrected up into the day of judgment. And that in front of me was this huge serpent, this huge monster in front of me. And that started chasing me. So he's chasing him and he's running away. And he's running away, he's chasing him. He finds an old man. He goes to that man and says, help me. This serpent is chasing after me. He says, I can't do anything. I'm an old weak guy. What can I do? So he leaves him and starts running until he goes until the edge of the land, and he looks in front of him, and it's a hellfire. And he looks behind him, and the serpent is still chasing him. He says, until I thought about jumping into the fire so that I can save myself from the serpent. And just as he was about to do that, he hears the voice, come back, you are the people of paradise. So hearing this voice, he decides not to jump, and he turns around and starts running back. And he's running. He comes to the old man again. He doesn't do anything. He says, I am too old, I am too weak, I cannot do anything. But go up to that hill. Perhaps some people up there can help you. So he runs up to that hill, and the serpent is still chasing him. He goes up to this little castle. And when the doors open, with announcement being, allow Malik ibn Nur to come in, he is one of us. And he goes and he enters inside and he looks, it's a bunch of small kids. And amongst the small kids was his daughter that just passed away. She comes up to him, and he's looking behind him, seeing the serpent's about to come upon him. His daughter waves to the serpent and tells him he's one of us. And the serpent just turns around and goes away. And Malik ibn Nur, what is going on? He goes to his daughter, says, what is this place? What are these things? What is that serpent? He says, oh my father, that serpent is your bad deeds. You strengthened it so much until it almost led you into the hellfire. And then he asks, who is that old man? She replied, that is your good deeds. You made him so weak, so brittle that he could not help you. He could not help you at all. Then he finally asks, what is this place? She says, these are the kids who died at a young age. We are waiting for our parents so we can go enter together into Jannah. And then she hugs her father. She says, Ya abata, oh my father, alam ya'ni lilladhina amanu an takhsha'a qulubuhum li dhikrillah. She mentioned the ayah of the Quran. She says, oh my father, is it not time for the believer that when they hear the mention of Allah, that their hearts quiver? Is it not time for the believer that when they hear the mention of Allah, that their hearts quiver? We need to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created us from two things, a body and a soul. Our body was made from this earth, from the clay of this earth, and it needs what comes out of this earth to benefit it as nutrition. So if you look at the food that comes to us, it comes from this earth. Allah also created us from a soul. And that soul came from Him directly. Allah blew into us our souls. And in order to provide nutrition from the soul, we have to get it from the source, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That whenever we mention Allah, whenever Allah's name is mentioned, our hearts should tremble. Our souls should feel replenished. When we start going back to what our origins are, when we start going back to what our purpose in life is, when we start remembering that this trust that Allah subhanahu gave to us and this honor Allah gave to us of saying La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, then we will go back to it. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إني داع فأمينوا. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك اللهم لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا برحمتك شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك فإنه لا يعز من عاديت ولا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. وأقم الصلاة.